The late 18th century was an age of extraordinary contrasts. Across Europe, magnificent palaces glittered with gold, royal courts celebrated extravagant banquets, and kings ruled by what many believed was divine right. Yet beyond the palace walls, millions of ordinary people struggled to survive. Nowhere was this contrast more dramatic than in the Kingdom of France. By the 1780s, France was one of the most powerful nations on earth. It possessed a rich cultural heritage, a formidable military, and a population of nearly 28 million people, making it the most populous country in Western Europe. Paris was a center of art, philosophy, fashion, and science. French writers and thinkers influenced ideas far beyond their borders, and the kingdom appeared to symbolize strength and prestige. But beneath this image of greatness, the foundations of the nation were beginning to crack. The French government was drowning in debt. Years of expensive wars, including support for the American Revolution against Great Britain, had emptied the royal treasury. Maintaining the magnificent Palace of Versailles required enormous sums of money, while government spending continued to exceed income year after year. Taxes should have solved the problem. Instead, they revealed one of the greatest injustices in French society. For centuries, France had been divided into a social system known as the Three Estates. The first estate consisted of the clergy. Bishops, priests, and church officials enjoyed enormous influence and owned vast amounts of land. Although many local priests lived modestly, the higher clergy often enjoyed great wealth and numerous privileges. The second estate was made up of the nobility. Noble families held important government positions, served as military officers, and possessed significant political influence. They owned large estates and, in many cases, paid few taxes despite their wealth. The third estate included everyone else: farmers, merchants, craftsmen, lawyers, doctors, teachers, laborers, shopkeepers, servants. Nearly 97% of the French population belonged to this estate. Yet despite forming almost the entire nation, they possessed the least political power. It was the third estate that carried most of the tax burden. Poor harvests made their situation even worse. During the late 1780s, unusually severe weather damaged crops across France. Wheat harvests declined dramatically, causing bread prices to rise. Bread was not merely one food among many. For ordinary families, bread was life itself. Many workers spent over half of their income simply purchasing enough bread to survive. When prices doubled or even tripled, hunger spread rapidly. In villages and cities alike, frustration turned into anger. Meanwhile, life at Versailles seemed untouched by the suffering outside. King Louis XVI was not considered a cruel ruler by many historians. He was intelligent, interested in science and engineering, and genuinely wished to improve his kingdom. Yet he often struggled to make firm decisions. He hesitated, he delayed, he changed his mind. At a moment requiring decisive leadership, uncertainty weakened the monarchy. His wife, Queen Marie Antoinette, became one of the most controversial figures in France. Born an Austrian princess, she was viewed with suspicion by many French citizens even before the crisis began. Stories spread portraying her as extravagant and indifferent to the suffering of ordinary people. One famous quote has long been attributed to her: "Let them eat cake." Modern historians agree there is no reliable evidence that Marie Antoinette ever said these words. The phrase had appeared in earlier writings before she became queen. Nevertheless, the story reflected how many people perceived the royal family. Whether true or false, it damaged her reputation enormously. At the same time, a new movement of ideas was spreading throughout Europe. Known as the Enlightenment, it encouraged people to question traditional authority. Thinkers such as Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu argued that governments should protect the rights of their citizens. Power, they believed, should not exist solely because of birth. Liberty, equality, justice, popular sovereignty. These ideas inspired educated French citizens to imagine a different society. Many officers who had fought alongside American revolutionaries returned home impressed by the success of the United States. If colonists could challenge a king and establish a new republic, some wondered, why couldn't France reform its own government? By 1788, the financial crisis had become impossible to ignore. The government lacked sufficient money even to pay its ordinary expenses. Finance ministers proposed taxing the nobility. The nobles resisted fiercely. Political deadlock followed. Unable to solve the crisis alone, Louis XVI made a historic decision. For the first time since 1614, he summoned the Estates General, an assembly representing the three estates. The meeting was scheduled for May 1789. Across France, communities prepared lists of grievances known as cahiers de doléances. Citizens described unfair taxes, corrupt officials, high food prices, restrictions on trade, demands for greater political representation. Many still hoped reform could occur peacefully. They did not yet seek a revolution. When representatives gathered at Versailles, excitement filled the air. The Third Estate expected meaningful change. Instead, they encountered another obstacle. Each estate traditionally possessed one vote. This meant the clergy and nobility could combine their votes to defeat proposals from the Third Estate, despite representing only a tiny fraction of the population. The Third Estate objected. Its representatives argued that voting should occur by individual delegate rather than by estate. The dispute quickly intensified. Weeks passed without agreement. Finally, on June 17, 1789, representatives of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly, claiming they represented the French nation rather than merely one social class. It was an extraordinary act. For the first time, ordinary representatives openly challenged royal authority. Soon afterward, they discovered their meeting hall locked. Unsure whether the king intended to dissolve their assembly, they gathered instead inside an indoor tennis court. There, they swore a remarkable promise. Known as the Tennis Court Oath, they vowed not to separate until France received the written constitution. This moment marked a turning point. Political disagreements had become open resistance. King Louis XVI hesitated once again. Some advisors urged compromise. Others recommended force. Royal troops gradually assembled around Paris and Versailles. Rumors spread rapidly through the capital. Many believed the king intended to crush the National Assembly by military action. Fear spread across Paris. Crowds searched desperately for weapons. On July 14, 1789, thousands of Parisians marched toward the Bastille, a medieval fortress that served as both prison and symbol of royal authority. Although only 7 prisoners remained inside, the fortress contained valuable supplies of gunpowder. Negotiations quickly collapsed. Fighting erupted. After several hours, the defenders surrendered. The governor of the Bastille was captured and killed by the crowd. His death shocked Europe. The fall of the Bastille became far more than a military event. It became a symbol that ordinary people could challenge absolute monarchy. News spread rapidly across France. Celebrations erupted in many towns. Elsewhere, fear intensified. The countryside experienced a wave of panic known as the Great Fear. Rumors claimed that nobles planned to destroy crops and punish rebellious peasants. Villagers armed themselves. Some attacked manor houses. Others burned records documenting feudal obligations and taxes. Centuries of resentment exploded almost overnight. Recognizing the seriousness of the crisis, the National Assembly acted swiftly. On the night of August 4, 1789, delegates voted to abolish many feudal privileges enjoyed by the nobility. Ancient rights that had existed for generations disappeared. Only weeks later came another revolutionary achievement. The Assembly adopted the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Inspired partly by Enlightenment philosophy and the American Revolution, the Declaration proclaimed that all men were born free and equal in rights. Liberty, property, security, resistance to oppression, freedom of speech, equality before the law. These principles challenged the very foundations of absolute monarchy. France had entered a new era, yet enormous challenges remained. The monarchy still existed. Economic problems continued. Food shortages persisted. Political factions grew increasingly divided. The revolution that had begun with hopes of constitutional reform was about to become far more radical than anyone had imagined. Within a few years, France would witness the execution of its king, the rise of revolutionary tribunals, the reign of terror, and the emergence of a young military commander named Napoleon Bonaparte, whose ambitions would reshape not only France, but the entire world. The fall of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, sent shockwaves across Europe. To many ordinary French citizens, it represented the birth of a new era. The seemingly invincible power of the monarchy had been challenged by the people themselves. Across France, church bells rang, celebrations erupted, and revolutionary ideas spread with astonishing speed. Yet while many celebrated, others watched with growing fear. King Louis XVI remained on the throne, but his authority was rapidly slipping away. The National Assembly continued drafting reforms designed to replace absolute monarchy with a constitutional government. Noble privileges were abolished, feudal obligations were dismantled, and the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen proclaimed liberty, equality before the law, and national sovereignty. For millions of French citizens, these changes promised hope. For much of Europe's royal elite, they represented a dangerous threat. Kings and queens across the continent worried that revolutionary ideas might spread into their own kingdoms. If ordinary people in France could challenge centuries of royal authority, others might soon attempt the same. Inside France, economic problems remained severe. Bread shortages continued. Inflation increased. Unemployment spread through many cities. Political debates grew increasingly bitter as different revolutionary groups disagreed over the future of the nation. One dramatic moment occurred in October 1789. Thousands of women, many angry over rising bread prices, gathered in Paris. Their protest soon became the famous Women's March on Versailles. Carrying pikes, muskets, knives, and banners, the crowd marched nearly 20 kilometers through heavy rain toward the royal palace. Their demands were simple: bread, justice, action from the king. When they reached Versailles, tensions quickly escalated. Some protesters entered the palace. Violence erupted. Several royal guards were killed. The royal family narrowly escaped greater danger. Eventually, King Louis XVI agreed to leave Versailles. The royal family relocated to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they remained under the close watch of revolutionary authorities. Although Louis was still officially king, he was no longer truly free. Power was steadily shifting toward the revolution. The National Assembly continued introducing sweeping reforms. Church lands were confiscated to help solve France's financial crisis. The government reorganized local administration. Traditional provinces were replaced with new departments. Legal systems became more standardized. For many supporters, these reforms represented progress. Others believed the revolution had gone too far. Religious tensions also intensified. The Assembly introduced the civil constitution of the clergy, requiring priests to swear loyalty to the French state. Many refused. The Catholic Church condemned the measure. Large numbers of religious citizens became increasingly hostile toward the revolution. Meanwhile, King Louis XVI struggled with his changing role. He privately opposed many revolutionary reforms. In June 1791, the king and his family secretly attempted to escape Paris. Disguised as ordinary travelers, they hoped to reach eastern France, where loyal troops could protect them. The plan failed. Recognized near the town of Varennes, the royal family was arrested and brought back to Paris. The flight to Varennes destroyed much of the remaining trust between the king and the French people. Many revolutionaries now believed Louis had betrayed the nation. Support for abolishing the monarchy grew stronger. At the same time, events beyond France's borders became increasingly dangerous. European monarchs viewed the revolution with alarm. Austria and Prussia warned that they might intervene to protect the French royal family. French revolutionaries interpreted these threats as evidence that foreign powers intended to destroy the revolution. In April 1792, France declared war on Austria. Prussia soon joined Austria. What began as a domestic revolution was becoming an international conflict. The early months of war were disastrous for France. The French army suffered repeated defeats. Many officers, drawn largely from the nobility, had resigned or fled the country. Military organization weakened. Rumor spread that the king secretly supported France's enemies. Public anger exploded once again. On August 10, 1792, revolutionary crowds stormed the Tuileries Palace. Swiss guards defending the king fought fiercely but were overwhelmed. Hundreds died during the violence. The monarchy effectively collapsed. Louis XVI was arrested. His family was imprisoned. France was no longer simply reforming its monarchy. It was preparing to abolish it. Only weeks later, another tragedy unfolded. As foreign armies approached France, panic gripped Paris. Many feared imprisoned royalists would escape and assist invading forces. Between September 2 and September 6, 1792, crowds entered Paris prisons and killed more than 1,000 prisoners. Some victims were political prisoners. Others had little connection to politics at all. The September massacres shocked Europe. Supporters argued they were desperate acts of self-defense. Critics condemned them as brutal mob violence. Soon afterward, the newly elected National Convention officially abolished the monarchy. France became a republic. The calendar itself would later be redesigned to symbolize a complete break from the old order. Attention then turned to the former king. Louis XVI, now referred to simply as Citizen Louis Capet, was placed on trial. The charges accused him of conspiring against the nation and betraying the revolution. The trial deeply divided France. Some delegates argued that executing the king would secure the republic. Others warned that killing him would encourage endless violence. After a lengthy debate, the convention voted. The sentence was death. On January 21, 1793, Louis XVI was taken to the Place de la Révolution in Paris. A large crowd gathered. The king attempted to speak, but was interrupted. Moments later, the blade of the guillotine fell. The execution of the king stunned Europe. For the first time in centuries, a reigning French monarch had been publicly executed by his own people. 9 months later, Marie Antoinette faced the same fate. After months of imprisonment, she too was tried and convicted. On October 16, 1793, she was executed by guillotine. Her death became one of the revolution's most enduring symbols. Meanwhile, France faced threats on every side. Foreign armies invaded, royalist uprisings erupted within the country. Economic hardship continued. Political divisions became increasingly extreme. Amid this crisis, one revolutionary group rose to dominance: the Jacobins. Led by figures such as Maximilien Robespierre, Louis Saint-Just, and Georges Couthon, the Jacobins argued that extraordinary dangers required extraordinary measures. To defend the revolution, they claimed, enemies both foreign and domestic had to be eliminated. The government created the Committee of Public Safety, effectively giving it emergency powers. Robespierre soon became its most influential member. He believed virtue and terror could exist together. According to Robespierre, terror was necessary to protect liberty from those seeking to destroy it. Thus began one of the most controversial periods in French history, the Reign of Terror. Special revolutionary tribunals tried thousands of suspected enemies. Evidence was often limited. Trials became increasingly brief. Convictions frequently resulted in execution. The guillotine operated almost daily. Nobles, priests, former revolutionaries, merchants, farmers, even ordinary citizens accused by neighbors, many faced execution. Between 1793 and 1794, approximately 17,000 people were officially executed, while thousands of others died in prison or through violence across France. Fear became part of everyday life. People avoided speaking openly. Friendships weakened. Political disagreements could become fatal. Ironically, the revolution that had begun with promises of liberty now relied increasingly on fear. Yet the government also achieved important successes. Mass conscription expanded the French army dramatically. New military leaders emerged through merit rather than noble birth. French forces began defeating foreign armies on multiple fronts. The revolution survived, but at a terrible cost. As executions continued, even many supporters of the revolution began to question Robespierre's methods. They feared no one was safe. The revolution seemed to be consuming its own leaders. In July 1794, members of the National Convention turned against Robespierre himself. He was arrested after a dramatic confrontation. The following day, July 28, 1794, Robespierre was executed by the very same guillotine that had claimed thousands of others during the Terror. His death marked the end of the Reign of Terror. The revolution entered a new phase. The radical government collapsed. A more moderate administration known as the Directory assumed power. However, France remained politically unstable. Economic difficulties persisted. Corruption increased. The nation was exhausted after years of revolution, executions, and war. Many French citizens longed for stability. They did not yet realize that a brilliant young military general, celebrated for his victories on the battlefield, was rapidly gaining popularity. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Within only a few years, he would seize power, bring the French Revolution to its conclusion, and reshape Europe in ways no one could imagine. The execution of Maximilien Robespierre in July 1794 brought an end to the Reign of Terror, but it did not immediately bring peace to France. The nation had endured 5 years of revolution, political violence, economic hardship, and foreign war. Thousands had died. The monarchy had been abolished, and centuries of tradition had been overturned. Yet, the question remained, who would now lead France? After Robespierre's fall, a more moderate government known as the Directory took control. Established in 1795, the Directory was designed to prevent any single individual from gaining absolute power. 5 directors shared executive authority, while elected assemblies handled legislation. On paper, the system appeared balanced. In reality, it struggled almost from the beginning. France continued facing financial crises. Inflation remained high. Food shortages persisted. Political corruption spread throughout the government. Royalists wanted to restore the monarchy. Radical revolutionaries believed the government had betrayed the ideals of the revolution. The Directory found itself caught between 2 powerful opposing forces. Its survival increasingly depended on the army. Among France's rising military leaders, one young general attracted extraordinary attention. His name was Napoleon Bonaparte. Born on the Mediterranean island of Corsica in 1769, Napoleon had graduated from military school as an artillery officer. Intelligent, ambitious, and exceptionally skilled at strategy, he quickly earned a reputation for winning battles against overwhelming odds. During the Italian campaign of 1796 to 1797, Napoleon achieved a series of remarkable victories against Austrian forces. His success transformed him into a national hero. Newspapers celebrated his achievements. Soldiers admired his leadership. Politicians recognized his growing influence. In 1798, Napoleon launched an ambitious expedition to Egypt, hoping to weaken British trade routes to India. Although the campaign produced mixed military results, it included an extraordinary scientific mission. Scholars accompanying the army studied ancient Egyptian civilization, leading to discoveries such as the Rosetta Stone, which later helped scholars decipher Egyptian hieroglyphs. Meanwhile, political instability continued in France. The Directory became increasingly unpopular. Many citizens believed the government was weak, corrupt, and incapable of solving the nation's problems. Napoleon recognized an opportunity. On November 9, 1799, 18 Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, he participated in a carefully planned coup d'état. The Directory collapsed. A new government known as the Consulate replaced it. Napoleon became first consul, effectively making him the most powerful man in France. Although the French Revolution is generally considered to have ended with Napoleon's rise to power, many of its ideas continued to influence his government. Napoleon introduced sweeping administrative reforms. He reorganized the legal system. He improved tax collection. He strengthened education. He established the Bank of France. Perhaps his greatest domestic achievement was the Napoleonic Code, introduced in 1804. The code established equality before the law for male citizens, protected property rights, and created a more uniform legal system. Many countries later based parts of their own legal systems on its principles. However, Napoleon also concentrated enormous authority in his own hands. In 1804, he crowned himself Emperor of the French during a ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. According to tradition, he took the crown from the Pope and placed it upon his own head, symbolizing that his authority came from himself rather than the church. Some observers believe the revolution had come full circle. France had overthrown one monarchy only to create another form of personal rule. Yet Napoleon's empire differed significantly from the old Bourbon monarchy. Many revolutionary reforms remained. Feudal privileges did not return. Careers increasingly depended on talent and service rather than noble birth. The ideals of merit, legal equality, and modern administration survived. Napoleon soon carried these ideas across Europe through military conquest. His armies defeated powerful coalitions of European monarchies and spread revolutionary principles into many conquered territories. Feudal systems weakened, legal reforms expanded, nationalism began growing throughout Europe. Ironically, while Napoleon sought to build a vast empire, his campaigns also inspired conquered peoples to develop stronger national identities. Eventually, years of warfare exhausted France. Napoleon suffered a disastrous invasion of Russia in 1812. Harsh winter conditions, supply shortages, and determined Russian resistance destroyed much of his grand army. European powers united against him. In 1814, Napoleon abdicated and was exiled to the island of Elba. Remarkably, he escaped less than a year later and briefly returned to power during the famous 100 Days. His final defeat came at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, where British and Prussian forces ended his rule permanently. He was exiled once again, this time to the remote island of St. Helena, where he died in 1821. With Napoleon's defeat, European leaders met at the Congress of Vienna. Their goal was to restore political stability after more than 2 decades of revolution and war. Many old monarchies returned to power. The Bourbon dynasty was restored in France under King Louis XVIII. However, Europe could never truly return to the world that had existed before 1789. The French Revolution had permanently transformed history. It destroyed the foundations of absolute monarchy in France. It ended centuries of feudal privilege. It proclaimed that sovereignty belonged not to kings but to the people. The revolution popularized ideals of liberty, equality, and citizenship that inspired future democratic movements across the world. Its influence extended far beyond France. Revolutionary ideas spread throughout Europe, Latin America, and eventually many other parts of the globe. Leaders such as Simón Bolívar drew inspiration from the principles of the revolution while fighting for independence in South America. Movements demanding constitutional government, civil rights, and national self-determination increasingly emerged during the 19th century. The revolution also transformed modern politics. Citizens became active participants in government rather than passive subjects of kings. Nationalism grew stronger. Political parties evolved. Modern concepts of citizenship and human rights gained wider acceptance. At the same time, the revolution revealed the dangers of political extremism. The Reign of Terror demonstrated how noble ideals could be overshadowed by fear, violence, and intolerance. Historians continue debating its legacy. Some emphasize its achievements in promoting democracy and equality. Others point to the immense suffering caused by political violence and prolonged war. Most agree that both aspects are essential to understanding its true significance. Today, the storming of the Bastille is commemorated every year on July 14th, celebrated as Bastille Day, France's national holiday. It honors not only the beginning of the revolution, but also the enduring values of liberty and national unity. More than 2 centuries later, the French Revolution remains one of the defining turning points in world history. It reshaped France. It challenged monarchies across Europe. It inspired generations to question injustice and demands political participation. Its ideas continue to influence constitutions, legal systems, and democratic institutions around the world. The revolution began with ordinary people demanding bread, fairness, and representation. It evolved into one of history's most dramatic struggles for power, freedom, and equality. Its path was marked by hope, courage, sacrifice, and tragedy. Although the revolution eventually gave way to Napoleon's empire, the ideals it unleashed could never again be contained. The cry for liberty, equality, and fraternity echoed far beyond the streets of Paris, becoming one of the most enduring messages in the history of human civilization.